The Chicago Bears have their work cut out for them on Sunday, but the Minnesota Vikings do have weaknesses that Matt Eberflus and Justin Fields can exploit.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we look at what the Chicago Bears need to do in order to beat the Minnesota Vikings. We put together our game plan for what this team should do in order to get that victory, that upset victory on Sunday. We'll start looking at the problem of Justin Jefferson and what the Bears can try and do defensively to keep him from going off for another big game, while also not forgetting about Adam Thielen or certainly Dalvin Cook in the Vikings backfield. We'll look at some of the different options there to try and balance those threats on this Minnesota offense. Then we'll look at what this Bears offense can do to get the passing game going against a Vikings defense that seems like there's some opportunity here to throw the ball against if your offensive line can hold up its end of the bargain, which has always been part of the problem thus far this season. And we'll wrap up looking at some of the big matchups that will ultimately decide how this game plays out on both sides of the ball. But I want to start with the Justin Jefferson question, because I don't think we need to tell you how good Justin Jefferson is unless you've been living under a rock or just paid absolutely zero attention to anything that's happened in Minnesota last season or this season. But he has 2 games over 145 receiving yards this season and a couple of games under 50. And we've seen the Eagles and the Lions to some extent find ways to kind of take him out of some of those matchups, and then he's dominated in the other games. And there hasn't really been much in between there. And the Bears need to make sure that he's not dominating them for 147 yards and 10 catches, because that's going to be a tough way to win ball games. Now, there's not just like an easy way to shut down one of the NFL's best receivers. One of the things that worked really well for the Philadelphia Eagles, especially, was what they did something that in the Vic Fangio defense, they call like a Zeus concept. But essentially, it's like a double team and sometimes a triple team, but often intentionally with zone based on how you're calling the plays. That basically you identify the player, in this case is Justin Jefferson, and then whatever side of the field he is on, you're running, not always, but when you're making the Zeus call, like you're running cover 2 to that side of the field. So you'll have an underneath zone defender and a deep zone defender. And then on the other side of the field, in the Fangio scheme, you're running like cover 6. So it'll be cover 2 on that side of the field. And then you'll go quarters coverage, cover 4 on the other half of the field, away from wherever that player is going to be. And so you sort of adjust the call based on where he's going to be lined up. I don't imagine the Chicago Bears are going to take that exact style of defense, because it's not the defense that they run exactly anymore. That's just some of the origins of what it will be. But I think you have to take some level of a similar approach, because with Jalen Johnson, not sure, but looking unlikely potentially to play in this game, you're again going to have Jalen Jones, Kindle Vildor, and Kyler Gordon as your cornerbacks, and you're not going to be able to just sit back in regular coverages and say, yeah, you'll be fine. You can take care of Justin Jefferson. So I'm thinking you're gonna see a lot of those types of 2 deep zone coverages with a particular extra emphasis with a guy on Justin Jefferson's side. You could also do like 2 deep with man coverage underneath and say, okay, like Kindle Vildor, you're one-on-one with Justin Jefferson, but you do have a deep safety over the top helping you no matter where he goes. You still got to be careful for everything underneath, and he can go in a bunch of directions and might still get open, but at least you have some help like that. But I can't help but wonder if maybe the strategy to mix in with that is something a little more aggressive. Like, I don't know that you can just sit back in cover 2 and cover 6 and 2-man all game long, because when you have 2 deep safeties like that, you are going to be a little lighter in the box, and if you're only running 2 or 3 coverages, you're going to be kind of predictable, and they're going to know, okay, here are the holes in those coverages, and here's where we can specifically attack. So you're going to have to do some of that and maybe a lot of that, but I'd also be curious about trying to blitz Kirk Cousins, and that's not the Bears' style with Allen Williams and Matt Eberflus, so I'm not necessarily expecting this to happen in terms of like a prediction, but more like what I think would be worth trying as something, especially to kind of mix up from what we've seen from the Bears defense overall, is that trying to get the ball out of Kirk Cousins' hands sooner gives Justin Jefferson less time to work one-on-one and get open. Then, if you don't have to be press man necessarily, but you just have to know that if you're going to blitz Kirk Cousins, then the ball's probably going to come out quicker. So be ready for those quicker types of routes and, bite on that initial move and trust that a blitz and a pass rush is going to be able to get home when you're sending extra rushers. Maybe there's not as much help on the back end, but if Kirk Cousins doesn't have time for Justin Jefferson to get downfield, they're not going to beat you in that way. And we've seen Kirk Cousins, every quarterback struggles when there's pressure in their face, but we've seen Kirk Cousins in particular be not great against the blitz and not great against pressure in general throughout his career, and especially this season, the blitz has been tricky at times for him to properly adjust to. And beyond that, when you're bringing the blitz, you're also then better prepared to stop the run. You have more guys in the box, you have more guys coming towards the ball, even if he hands it off, like you're going to be able to help shut down Dalvin Cook more when your running defense has been struggling this season. So I think there are some real advantages to at least sprinkling in more blitzes than we've seen from the Bears this season, if not making it an even bigger priority as sort of something to alternate and mix in with the 2 deep zone coverages to keep multiple bodies on Justin Jefferson at all times. Not forgetting that Adam Thielen is also a very good wide receiver, and KJ Osborne, their number 3, is, I think, underrated in NFL circles. So like there's a lot of threats there, and you can't shut them all down, but you can at least sort of try some different things to attack this offense, make Kirk Cousins' life more difficult, and not give Justin Jefferson extended time one-on-one with a quarterback having time to throw against your injured and struggling cornerback room. I think it's a similar idea for the Vikings attacking Justin Fields, right? They don't want to give him time to throw, and they want to make him a little bit more uncomfortable. But we'll look at some of the things the Bears offense can do to try and get this passing game going a little bit more next on Locked On Bears. All right, here's a sports analogy for you. When it comes to burglars, your home is like the end zone, and you need the absolute strongest defense you can muster. That's why we recommend our friends at SimpliSafe Home Security. At SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters. It's cutting-edge technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back, so you can always know your home is safe. They've got advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras inside and out, and smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real, and even some hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. SimpliSafe is here to keep you protected. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl. You can save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan, and you get your first month free. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonnfl to learn more. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Every week we talk about how the Bears passing game needs to get going a little bit more. And so like at this point, I'm not going to come into any of these matchups and say this is the week that it's finally going to happen. But we can still talk about the ways that they can help sort of promote it, right? Help push it towards clicking in this Bears offense. And one of the ideas that we've sort of touched on a little bit in recent pods and talked about like with some of the Justin Fields stuff, but I don't know that we've really like sat down and been straightforward about it. But I think a way to help Fields that we're not seeing the Bears do quite enough of is focus more concepts on in-breaking routes going over the middle of the field. I think the Vikings present a matchup there in terms of their linebackers and their slot cornerbacks that can be advantageous in that anyway. But I also think it's more helpful for Fields because it does seem like a lot of the balls you're seeing him throw and a lot of the things the offense seem to be prioritizing is like we're seeing plenty of those, like he'll hit, the deeper curl routes, the deeper comeback routes, and some or like when he's rolling out, it's the outbreaking route, to the near sideline. And all of those types of routes require a fairly precise timing, whether it's a curl or a comeback or an out. Like you have to hit the receiver on his break and very, very soon on his break, because if you wait much longer than his break, he will be done with the route. He'll be to the sideline. He'll have finished the comeback, and then there's nowhere else for him to go, or he'll finish the curl, and he's kind of like standing there. And then at that point, if he has not had the ball at that point in his route, then the route is done, and he has to go into scramble drill mode, and then it's sort of just backyard football. So all of those types of routes require there's a quick window where the ball has to be in there, or it's not going to get there at all, or else it's going to be too late and risk an interception. But if you're working, in routes, just 90-degree in routes or crossing routes or drag routes underneath, things working across the middle of the field, you create oftentimes multiple windows that Fields can throw in, right? You don't just have to, if you're saying, say you got a slot receiver who goes 15 yards downfield and then turns and goes horizontal, perpendicular across the middle of the field, right? You can hit him when he first makes that break in, or if you don't get to him in your progression at that break, there's going to be he can continue his route across the middle of the field all the way to the opposite sideline if he wants to, and along that way, there may be multiple windows within the same route, whether it's between zone coverage or whether he's outrunning a man-to-man coverage receiver or defender who's behind him. There are multiple opportunities along that route path where Fields could hit him. And when Fields is at this point right now where he's not fully trusting what he's seeing and he's not, confidently delivering that ball in that precise timing window when it needs to be open, that's just not the type of quarterback he's ever been. He's not a precise timing. He's a big shot downfield type of vertical passer. And I think those types of crossing routes, drag routes, and in routes, no matter which level they're on, when you're crossing the middle of the field, the route has more length to it. It doesn't necessarily take more time for the route to get open, but you might have multiple windows of him getting open so that if Fields sees the in-breaking route and doesn't hit it the first time it's open, it might be open a second or even a third time as the play continues without it having to be that first quick window type of throw. So I think it's advantageous to what Fields has struggled with and where his strengths are at this stage of the process. And we heard yesterday on our Crossover Thursday podcast with Arif Hassan that this Vikings secondary has struggled a bit with, miscommunications and busted coverages and making sure that they're passing off routes the way that they are supposed to. And what better way to make them pass off routes is then to work across the middle of the field. Because if you're one-on-one on the outside and breaking to the outside, there's nothing to pass off. But the more you can sort of cross the middle of the field, think back to the end of the Vic Fangio years and Ed Donatell, and Sean Desai in Chicago, and how often it felt like the Bears would get burned by those deep crossing routes behind the linebackers. This is Ed Donatell's defense in Minnesota. It feels like those should be available, and they don't have to take drastic amount of time to get open, right? Underneath drag route is open. It's a check down essentially, and the in routes can take as long as deep as you want them to be, right? Same with the crossing routes. The deeper they are before they break in, the more time your quarterback's going to need to have to get the ball there. But you can control for that, and you can change the length of the routes depending on what the play call is going to be. So it just seems like it's a good idea to attack what the Vikings have struggled with, where there's some weaknesses on their defense, and it's better for what Justin Fields is currently operating as a quarterback. Because I think the Bears should be able to run the ball fairly well in this game. It's not going to be easy in any way, but we've seen them consistently run the ball this season, and I think they should have some similar opportunities to do so in this game. You don't need to reinvent the wheel there. I just want to see maybe, when Justin Fields does have to scramble, keeping his eyes downfield a little bit more and looking for more of those open routes after he escapes the pocket and not just turn straight into runner mode there. Keep the pass, still work towards the line of scrimmage, but keep the passing play alive a little bit longer and keep working on the pocket presence there. And altogether, there should be some opportunities to get some more things going in the passing game. So much of that can and will be offensive line dependent. We know the Vikings have some decent pass rush going, particularly their edge rushers. We heard yesterday from Reef Hassan, Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter have really kind of been the strength there, but I'm a little bit more concerned about what we're going to see on the interior, more so because of the Bears' offensive line than any disrespect to what the Vikings have on the edge there. So we'll get into a few of those key matchups on both sides of the ball that I think will ultimately end up determining how this game goes next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline, the number one place for all of your sports betting needs. Looking at this Bears-Vikings matchup, right now the line on BetOnline is Bears plus 7.5. It's moved that half point away from the Chicago Bears. The money line is set at Bears plus 270 if you want to call the upset straight up. And the over-under is set at a 44-point game. So based on that spread, it would be like they're predicting a 19-26 final score. It would be 7 points and a total of 44 is about where BetOnline is predicting this game. If you disagree, that's where you can make your money. Head on over to BetOnline to find all the latest player developments and team matchups, news, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game, not just the Bears, but all of your professional sports needs. BetOnline is going to be your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, live betting as well as things change throughout the game. So head on over to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. When you look at the most important matchups in this game, for me, it starts with the shaky interior of this Bears offensive line. We saw last week against the Giants, Sam Mustipher was brutal in pass protection. Lucas Patrick, filling in at left guard, did not look much better. Maybe a whole week of practicing at left guard will help Lucas Patrick settle in, as opposed to just being thrown into a new position, a new side of the offensive line for the first time all season. Was likely a lot on his plate, so maybe he can settle in a little bit more. But those two spots are a bigger concern for me than your 2 fifth-round picks at the offensive tackles, especially going up against an interior pass rusher like Dalvin Tomlinson, who has been quite productive for the Vikings this season. We heard from Arif yesterday that Danielle Hunter's kind of been the one who's been getting like the double teams and a lot of the attention, so he hasn't had as much of the production there. And I think Tomlinson has benefited. And if you think back to like how Akeem Hicks would get one-on-one matchups in large part due to Khalil Mack commanding so many double teams on the side. Not that those players are one-to-one comparisons, but just functionally, that's how you might better think about it in a matchup like this. But Tomlinson has more pressures this season. I think more sacks, more quarterback hits than Hunter, but not as many as Zadarius Smith. But I can sort of live, I think, from a Justin Fields perspective, that when the pressure comes from the edges, right, it's easier for him to just roll away and escape. But when the pressure is up the middle, he can't step up, and sometimes he ends up stepping back and around into the edge rushers, and I think that's been more difficult for him to handle. And so I'm concerned about how well they're going to be able to block Dalvin Tomlinson in particular as that interior pass rusher that this troublesome left guard center combination for the Chicago Bears is ultimately providing. Personally, I think the group that gives you the best chance to win would be putting in the veteran Michael Schofield at left guard and starting Lucas Patrick at center and seeing how that goes. I know they've been waiting for Lucas Patrick's hand to fully heal so he could snap the ball more consistently, but I would just rather have the veterans in there than Mustipher, who I think is still young and struggling at this stage of his career. But regardless, concern number one, if the Bears can hold up on that interior, it'll go a long way towards Fields in this passing game getting rolling a little bit more. If I'm looking for a matchup for my receivers, it's Darnell Mooney in the slot against Chandon Sullivan. Sullivan came over from the Green Bay Packers, so I'm sure Luke Getsy, will have plenty of familiarity with him and his strengths and weaknesses to potentially attack him, having practiced against him for a few years over there. The Bears have been using Mooney as kind of their primary slot guy when they bring in Equanimeous St. Brown, and Pettis rotates in the slot some too, but Mooney has sort of played the most slot of any of the Bears receivers, and I think Sullivan is kind of the weak link on that Vikings secondary. Patrick Peterson and Cameron Dantzler on the outside have been a little bit more reliable there, and Sullivan in the slot is an area where you can find some weakness. So again, those in-breaking routes with Mooney in the slot, whether it's working a Sullivan or making Sullivan pass him off to a linebacker, I like that matchup a lot too for Mooney versus whether it's Jordan Hicks or Eric Kendricks or whatever they have on the interior there. I think there's some chances there for the Bears to get some favorable matchups in that one. I would imagine the Vikings are looking at something similar with Kyler Gordon, given how much he has struggled in the slot in particular, and they're going to move Justin Jefferson around to get him the best matchups that they can, and I think that's a real concern for me, is how the rookie is going to handle such a dominant wide receiver like Justin Jefferson, and they're going to need to give whoever's covering him some help, whether it's Jalen Jones or Kyler Gordon or Kindle Vildor, right? I mean, any of those guys are going to need help from Justin Jefferson. We talked in the first segment about some of the ways that they can do that. But if you're going to blitz, like, you got to be off on Justin Jefferson and just bite on the first thing, because if he tries to pull a double move on you, in theory, the blitz needs to get home before the double move could really be finished and sold. So I'm curious to see if attacking Kyler Gordon is the game plan specifically for Justin Jefferson, or if they want Thielen over there in the slot to try and beat him with his route running. I mean, they've got some options there, and I'm concerned that Gordon is going to be on the targeted end of what they try and do offensively there. For the Bears, it's kind of the inverse of what we talked about with the Vikings, where they too have their offensive line strength. Well, the Vikings' offensive line strength is their tackles. The Bears' offensive line strength right now is Tevin Jenkins, but then, like, their tackles are not as big of a concern as the interior. But the Vikings' big concern is also the interior. And I wonder if we couldn't be in for a little revenge game for Armon Watts, the defensive tackle the Bears brought on waivers, their backup 3 technique, who I've really liked. I just think he's a high motor, energy, hustle type guy who just fights to the whistle and gets some kind of pressures that way. But otherwise, Justin Jones as your starting 3 technique needs to be more productive as a pass rusher. And Arif yesterday was expressing his concerns for the Vikings guards. Ezra Cleveland and the rookie Ed Ingram are both not great. The center Garrett Bradbury has been better this season, but better was a very low bar, and he's kind of been their Sam Mustipher of sorts. So there should be opportunity for the Bears to get some interior pass rush, and if they can get that in Kirk Cousins' face, he is not a mobile quarterback, right? And he is not elusive in the pocket, and so that's going to be that can be a surefire way to limit the damage that Justin Jefferson can do and overall limit some of the damage of their offense. And you can't let Dalvin Cook get going in that regard either. We don't want to overlook the fact that he is a very good running back, even if the team hasn't been running the ball super, super well this season. I would just point out, not necessarily like a specific matchup, although I would say the right tackle versus Al-Qadim Muhammad is sort of an honorary mention here. Brian O'Neill has been the better of their 2 tackles, and their running game has had a lot more success getting Dalvin Cook out on the edge, and Al-Qadim Muhammad has struggled a little bit setting the edge, and Brian O'Neill has kind of been the leader of that running game, particularly like right side, getting him to the edge has been where they've had some of their big runs this season. So I'm concerned about that matchup, specifically end versus tackle, but also the linebackers, Smith and Morrow and Brisker coming down, getting to the outside there and making sure that Cook's not getting free and beating you that way, because then it just becomes too easy to then run the play action that the Bears have been too vulnerable against and find Thielen and Jefferson open with more time for Kirk Cousins than downfield. It's a tall task, right? The Bears are more than a touchdown underdogs now for a reason. I mean, the Vikings are 3-1. The Bears lost to the Giants last week. I think the Vikings are a little bit of a flimsier 3-1, but they're still clearly right now a better football team than what the Chicago Bears have shown. And so it'll be a fun game. I'm expecting some field goals with both of these teams struggling in the red zone as of late, but I think the Bears will keep it close. This is not a Bears team that is going to get blown out. They don't strike me as a team that's going to just bend over or sort of roll over and get blown out in the second half. So we know how resilient they are in the second half of the game. And I think this one will always be sort of within grasp. But ultimately, if I had to put a prediction on it, if I'm betting on betonline.ag, I'm probably thinking the Vikings are going to come away with this one. But there is a path there. We went through the game plan, what the Bears can do and should do and need to do in order to win this game. No matter what happens on Sunday, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast on Monday. So make sure you come back for more of that daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On Vikings with Luke Braun. Get to know your divisional opponent and find out everything you need to know about the Vikings heading into this big Week 5 matchup. Coming back for Monday for not only more Bears analysis, but of course, come back for your next opportunity to bear down.